Hi guys, welcome back to the Paradigm Project. Last week, we talked with Asher Cox and Sarah Arnesen through the Constitution, and today we're going to talk about how it applies to our lives and why should we even care about it.
And remember from last episode, if you committed treason, win.
So kind of what we were talking about last time with treason is when we go against the government that we've set up and purposely try to throw them off or go against the principal law, primary law, positive law. Thank you. The positive law. And the founding fathers were really specific about when they wanted to do that. They suffered for many years under Great Britain, taking away their rights. And they tried lots of different ways to fight for their freedoms and have representation and have the things they wanted before they finally committed treason and signed their names to the Declaration of Independence. And so kind of what we were saying last time is, before you do something like that, you better really believe in it and go back to the principles. And if we're just doing it to have like this instant fun thing, or we're just upset and passionate about something, then it may not be worth it. And we need to go back to the principles behind it before we try to do something like that.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for working within the system. I hear a lot people saying like our system doesn't work for everybody, like it's so awful. I'm like, no, you just didn't apply yourself. It's just like a math formula. You have to plug in the numbers. You can't just, expect everything to work perfectly when you're not engaging in it. And so I think with movements or being passionate about some event, you step back, evaluate what your feelings are, what you can actually reasonably do about it, and is it worth uprooting something for? Because I feel like now there's just not many things that are actually worth destroying something.
I think sometimes we have to remember that takes a lot of work, right? If we want to be involved and work through the system, then we really have to be dedicated to putting the time in. And it's really overwhelming to try to fix something at a big level, but there's a lot we can do at the lower level that actually gets us kind of in the door to doing things at the big level. That low level can start as small as our county or our city or even our neighborhood. HOAs are a form of government, or school government is a form of government, or school boards. If you want something changed in your school, the school board is a pretty accessible place to go. I remember last year we were in a writers group and Fife wrote a paper about how he had invited all his neighbors over for scones, and they had them all in their garage one night. And that's government and being involved, right, is knowing your neighbors and being able to work those things out on the small level. But that takes the work. You have to invite people over for scones, and you have to know your neighbors, and you have to go to the school board meeting or go to the city council meeting and talk to people and research the issue and know what's going on and understand the principles and the growth. And it's a lot of work.
One thing I think we've turned the cliche of getting involved in government is voting, which is not. Vote. But what we've turned into is if you vote, you're an involved citizen. And that has changed so that now campaigning is a game. Okay, so I remember being involved in high school campaigns, and it was basically you voted for the person who gave you the most candy that week of election week. And I remember thinking in high school, I wish this was more real, because I don't know what a campaign will be like. I don't know how to elect a politician. And then I was like, oh, it was real. So it's very, very similar. Yeah. It's just a big game of who has the most handouts and the prettiest posters and is seen the most on TV and has the most name recognition and promises the most big things that will be right in your face. The way to be involved is not just to vote, but to know why you are a citizen of the country. Like, I vote because I'm in my school board and I know how much we're making and I know what the budget is and I know how many students we have and I know what our demographic is. And so I want to vote for. Now I have a principle I'm voting for. I'm voting for a person who would stand up for a principle, and it's not an agenda and it's not a team. That's the other thing that we have to watch for in elections, is that now it's voting for teams. And not only do I want my team to win, but sometimes I don't care if my team wins as much as your team loses. And that's what happens when you make teams. And that's appropriate in competitive sports and in other places where you have team groups. And this should not ever be a team sport. Elections are very dangerous when you get into groups, which means that voting and being involved as a citizen, one of the foundational principles is that it is long term. As soon as we act in the short term, and don't get me wrong, there are things that have to be dealt with, but not quick fixes. When I vote with the short term in mind, I'm causing a problem for somebody else later. Our government is created to be slow and laborious and confusing on purpose so that we are not hurting generations to come, and anything we do, if it does help us, it will also help generations to come.
Well, where did the game start? What happened to like create this mindset that campaigning is a game?
I think it's just so human nature, right?
Right.
You're an older sibling.
Yeah.
Have you ever got your younger siblings to do things by
Yes.
promising them things?
Yes.
I have 4 younger brothers, and I kept a candy stash of candy that I didn't feel like was worthy
Oh my
to enter
goodness.
my body because it just wasn't delicious enough. And I could get them to do anything by promising them hard candies that were really old, you know?
Oh my gosh.
Or maybe you're a middle child. Maybe you haven't done it. I don't know. You're the youngest. Did people ever bribe you with things like that? Or
Nope. I was
Okay,
not
your
really
siblings
loved.
failed. When you want to have that power, and even sometimes good people, when they want to have influence, like sometimes you just have to learn how to play the game. And I'm not supporting that, but it's so easy to start playing
Right.
the game. I remember a simulation a couple years ago, and I was going to do prep work, and Justice shook. He asked me if I'd participate and told me I could wear a tiara if I did. And so I did. And I sat in the hall with my tiara on and sat with my computer and was getting work done. And I told the kids that every time they walked past me, they needed to bow to me and call me Your Majesty. And by the end of the morning, every kid in the school was doing it. I looked like I knew what was going on, so I started like drawing people maps of things and telling them where to look for things that they were asking me for. I had no
And you're making this up,
clue what was
right?
Oh my
going on.
goodness.
And then the next day, I had them make crowns and sashes, and they followed me around and protected me. And we had a knighting ceremony. And then the simulation killed me off the next day because I just, I think I was messing it up and I needed to go home early and they couldn't explain what was going on. But I would not have done that in real life. But it was so easy in a simulation to just kind of like gain that power. Like, I wonder what else I can make them
Right.
do. So anyways, that's probably too long of a story for that. But I think it's just really human nature.
Well, it started even from like day one, pretty much. Like the minute George Washington stepped down, you look at the election of 1800, disgusting, nasty stuff they were posting about each other. You know,
Right.
Thomas Jefferson posting that John Adams was a hermaphrodite and like stuff like that. Like you think that, you know, maybe that would have been a sign of like corruption, like moving forward. But no, it was like kind of day one. Not saying that like our founding fathers were terrible and corrupt, even though some of them were a little interesting. Like Ms. Arnesen said, it's so easy.
Right.
It's the easiest way. Instead of being like, hey, this is the reality of the situation. It's going to take a long time. I can't promise anything right as I get into office, but I have the faith in myself and my team to like, you know, I don't know, work on whatever. But it's easier to say, hey, he's a racist. And then like, I support this and that. And if I get elected, then I will make America free to live in. Like, it's just easier to promise things than it is to be like, the reality of the situation is nothing is that easy. And I'm going to be honest with you. They're never honest.
Right.
Which is why it's important, I think, as citizens that we have to sort through all of that, right? And look to the principles. Going back to kind of high school elections, any election, we have to understand what powers they actually have in that office. I think a lot of times we even promise things that we can't give. That's the classic, like, high school movie student election things, right? They're promising these ridiculous things that they don't have any power to do. And we even see that in high school, right? Like, I know a lot of scholars at Paradigm have strong opinions about the dress code and want to petition the student body leaders to change that. But in reality,
we are
the
not allowed
scholars
to even
have
bring
no
it
power.
up. Yeah.
In fact, the administration has no power and the mentors have no power. That power belongs to the board. So when we're electing people, we need to, first of all, listen clearly to what they're saying. Second of all, if they're promising things that are outside of their power, then that's not a great principled way to base your vote, because they are promising things they don't have power for and are not looking to fulfill their role in the government.
And
Yeah.
I think to understand like what they're promising and be like, hey, they can and can't actually do that is like, you have to know your documents. You have to read them. You have to understand the separation of powers, or else you're going to be blind and think you know what you're doing. Like Ms. Arnesen with the maps. But in reality, she doesn't know where anything is. Like, I don't know. You just need to know what you're talking about.
You also, we have to watch being led by emotion, and we need to be emotionally invested in things. That's the only way that we actually act and get motivated to work. But at the same time, if I make decisions based on emotion, then I get carried away with things that aren't real. So for example, if someone is campaigning at Paradigm and they're going on and on about how they're going to change the dress code and they know they're going to act and it's going to be amazing, then my emotion gets really caught up in that, and like somebody can make some rallying speech about that. If another candidate stands up and says, I'm going to attend board meetings and I'm going to try to get myself on the agenda so I can ask the board questions about the dress code and how it can change. There is no emotion in that. There is no promise for change. There's not a lot of potential for change. However, that is a very real thing that a president could do and would influence. If there was change to be influenced, that's the only way to go about doing it. But if someone stands up and speaks like that, I stop listening because it's not interesting. And it might not actually get me what I want. So I listen to the impassioned, the dress code is stupid and we must change it. That makes me feel like a very quick emotional response to what is being said. So I have to be careful as a citizen to know what it feels like to be emotionally led and logically led. And I have to make sure that I'm listening to both. And it's okay to be emotional. It's okay to care about something. Again, that's what gets things done. But I have to know the consequences and the reality and the functionality and that things will take time. And it's okay if they don't get done right away. It's okay if it's a little bureaucratic. It's okay if I have to attend meetings in the meantime. Like I have to slow down and be willing to be bored in order to get my emotional agenda across.
Well, it's interesting to look and see how childish it all seems. Like what Ms. Arnesen was saying, you give your brothers one candy and they'll do whatever for you. I mean, if you can promise something that somebody really wants, they'll throw away their, I don't know, morals, principles, things that they thought were good for the one thing that they wanted because they're emotionally invested in it.
You look at this past election, it was completely emotional. Neither of the sides really campaigned. It was just vote for me because I'm not the other person. It just like, it's so sad because it all was emotional and we were all played so badly.
Going right along with that, this is just my favorite quote. And we were kind of talking about this last time too, where the difference between being ruled by law versus being ruled by, you know, our passions or the equal things we want or the things we want right now, and how law is very long term, right? We think far ahead. Maybe if I go as the scholar body president at Paradigm, if I go to the board and talk to them about our concerns with the dress code, it probably isn't going to get fixed while I'm the president, right? It's going to be my younger siblings who are benefiting. That's the rule by law versus this emotional side. Aristotle says law is reason free from passion. And I think if we value the law and understand the law, then we have to take a step back, be passionate, and then take this step back and look at our principles and match up what we're passionate about with our principles. And if we feel that's going to last long term, and not even just 5 years down the road, but principles stay the same forever. Is this going to last for 500 years down the road? Which is why it's important as a great citizen to really value our education and be constantly involved in founding documents and principally based writings so that we don't get caught up in that everyday passion that affects our everyday life, right? Those are the things where we have to wear a certain thing at school, or we're paying extra taxes for our gas and we're not sure how to pay for gas anymore because something happened, right? But we look back to big principles.
I love the way you said that. I've never really put it into that much clarity. The rule of law versus rule of man. So if I'm voting because a person said, I'll get this thing across, or I'll lower your taxes, or I will, whatever it is that they can do because of their influence or their position, what I'm doing is voting in a king. I'm asking them to use their personal power, personal influence to do something that I want, as opposed to saying, how are you going to go about doing that? Anytime anybody says anything about raising or lowering taxes, they're taking or putting money from somewhere else to somewhere else. It doesn't appear out of nowhere. It doesn't happen magically. So if I'm not thinking through, okay, they want to change like school taxes, right? I want to be able to go to school. So they're going to change that. Are they going to raise gas taxes? Are they going to raise food taxes? Road taxes, that was a big deal here in Riverton not too long ago. And I complain, I don't want to pay for the road that I'm not going to actually drive on. But I'm not noticing that if they don't take it out of there, they're going to take it out of school, or they're going to take it out of food, or they're going to take it somewhere else. So if I am not asking those questions, what law are you influencing? What is the long-term consequence of that law? How does that change and influence other laws? Then all I'm doing is talking to a human. And that was the whole point. The foundation of the Constitution is that it's based on law. Because as soon as you rely on humans, it's arbitrary and unpredictable. And now the consequences are not consistent. I don't know how my actions will be seen. I don't know how my actions will be, what the consequence of my actions will be in the future. They're going to change. Whereas if I know the law, and if something's written and discussed and fleshed out, then I know exactly what I'm getting and why I'm getting it and where. So to study and to vote for law instead of for people. Now, don't get me wrong, we need honest, trustworthy people to influence and create these laws. But I think elections are run now based on who do I choose, like the personality
Right.
or influence of the person, not of the ability to use and understand law.
Madison talks about that in Federalist 10. He talks about how instead of voting for a specific issue, we really need to vote for someone who can take a step back and look at this group wants this, and this group wants this, and this group wants this. And I step back as the elected official and I look at what is good for everyone and in accordance with the law. And I think we have to point out, too, that sometimes the law isn't comfortable. Like, living on principles in the law can sometimes take longer, and it sometimes means we don't get what we want. And it can mean that we're uncomfortable, and it's just not necessarily the most fun.
So I wanted to kind of comment on something somebody said a minute ago, that, like, when did this start?
Right.
And that it started from the beginning,
Yeah.
right? And then we have this human nature about us that is corruptible. And that is absolutely true. But I also want to make sure that we know that this nature has ebbed and flowed, that we tend to get really, really virtuous, and then we can kind of ease off a little bit. And Adams and Jefferson kind of say, you know what, Washington did so well, and he left us this great job of presidency. And they take it and run with it, and it gets pretty bad. And then it kind of, Madison calms us down a little bit. He has to get through the War of 1812, and he has to get through some real struggles, and so they have to find their foundation again. We kind of fall back into what is real, and he rebuilds it a little bit, and his wife is amazing and saves the White House and all the world's documents and things like that. Just throwing that out. Anyway, woman power. Yeah, right. Dolly Madison, look her up. But then it gets corrupt again, and we ebb and flow through history. But what would discussion of government be if we didn't bring up Grover Cleveland? So I don't know if you guys.
I don't know anything
Everybody.
about him. So
Wouldn't
Nobody-
be a discussion
Light in
without
me.
Asher bringing up Grover Cleveland.
Thank you. Nobody knows about Grover Cleveland. Why would anybody know? He is my favorite person ever. So he was the 22nd and the 24th president. Grover Cleveland, I think, is the perfect example of this. Washington is obviously our standard of virtue. He's amazing. We tend to be more virtuous in the more challenging times. Again, wars kind of bring about this camaraderie of virtue and goodness, and Washington, being the general that he was and being the person he was in the right time, the right place, and got us through a phase where we needed foundations. Grover Cleveland was coming into an extremely corrupt America. So we were out of the Civil War, that had finally ended, and we were into the Industrial Revolution. So everyone's about making money at the cheapest possible way. So we had several presidents before him and in between him who were extremely corrupt. We got into the most debt right before him. They called it the $1 billion presidency, because we hit, like, the debt had just gotten so big so fast. So, and nothing else was going on. Like, we weren't in a time of major turmoil. Everybody was very successful as far as capitalism goes. And so he comes along, and he was, at the very beginning of his political career, he was mayor of Buffalo, New York. And he was that obnoxious mayor who, like, said no to everything and raised taxes so that things could be cleaned up. So he raised taxes so that the city could be cleaned up, so that there was this big scandal about the railroads, and everybody was really, really mad that it was costing more and they couldn't afford it, and they complained and complained. And he said, do you want one that works or not? I'm just going to make one that works. It doesn't matter. Vote me out. I'm going to make a railroad that works. And I'm not kidding. He got so much backlash for almost everything he did, and he always got reelected. People crave discipline. We crave boundaries, and we really do want a good lifestyle. We want good things around us, and we're whiners, and that is real.
Yeah.
So Grover Cleveland works his way up, and he's mayor and then governor, and then he runs for president, and he was involved in all kinds of other things and different perspectives, and he was always principled. And he gave these great speeches about why he shut down laws and why he vetoed laws and why he raised taxes or why he cut taxes. And it was always like, the citizen can take care of this. This is not our job. The government is not allowed. He will not overstep its bounds. And I'm not going to create something cheap to satisfy the citizen. They're whining. I'm not going to hire this guy to get me my political buddy that will keep me in office. He was always on principle, and he was always complained about and always got backlash and always got reelected. So, well, he was able to be really, really influential in a lot of ways. So I think it's easy to fall for the idea that, oh, well, like, the whiners are gonna get their way, and people are corruptible, and that sucks. So I guess I just have to take this political bargain, or I have to do this tax scheme so that people will be happy. And that isn't true. Even if you have to stand up, you have to be strong, and you have to take people's complaining, But when you complain and then get something good about it, a discussion begins. And when you complain and you get your way, you complain more, right? Like the consequence teaches us what our behavior actually is.
So we should complain to discuss and not complain to complain.
What I'm saying is we're going to complain because we're terrible.
Right.
We should learn from that and do better. But it can happen, and it does happen. And it happens all the time, especially local government. The smaller you get, the more honest, the more hardworking people you get, simply because you can come in contact with them and they can see you and you know a lot more about them. But it is so important to remember that the good is real and good can be done and it is effective and it's happening all the time, and we are not alone. When you're trying to do something good, sometimes it appears that you're the only one trying to be good and so you're going to lose. And that is absolutely not true. The good people usually are like busy and hard at work. They're not complaining on social media. They're not getting groups together to scream together or to even just rally together. They're at work. And so it appears alone and it appears isolated, but it's really not. There's a lot of good people doing a lot of good things, and it really does work. Maybe not today, but it will work over time.
Well, that's like Lewis's the circle, the inner ring, where
Yes.
he's basically saying towards the end, the only way to have true friends is to work hard. And then as you're working hard with other people, you come together and you develop that friendship through the hard work and not through the bribing or anything like that.
Even, yes, he does such a good example of even trying to be friends. If you're like, I want to be friends with those people.
Right.
So I start to act like those people, or I start to hang out where they're hanging out. Then everyone knows I'm like, that's not what you do naturally. So it feels manipulated. But we're all working hard towards a common morality and a common virtue. And then we want to be around each other, and
Right.
suddenly we're friends.
We see that a lot with like the way the Constitution came about. It was a group of people who wanted to work hard towards a common moral idea, and they wanted to be better and have a better form of government. And that developed like a high virtue group of people. And then as people wanted to be like that, they saw those people in that ring who had worked hard, and they're like, I want to be like that. So they tried to force their way into that kind of situation, that kind of the way they were.
I think there's a common theme between, like the history behind the writing of the Constitution or the founding of our government and what Ms. Cox said about, or I guess I can call you Asher. I don't even know. It's weird. It's kind of creepy. Anyway.
That lady in the corner.
I know. Anyway, a common theme is, like we go through periods where we're just like super awful and immoral, and then we come together and we're virtuous and good people again. And it happens a lot during war times. Like we saw, I don't know, I wasn't alive, but I'm assuming, like, because you think about like JFK, he was involved in the Korean War or the Vietnam War, and it got really bad, like kind of during and after. The Vietnam War is a very special thing. But people loved him, and people, I feel like, had like a common, something to hold them together, even if it was their hate for the Vietnam War or whatever. My point is that we become more virtuous in times of war, and they were fairly virtuous people when writing the Constitution. Obviously, it's a loose term, depending on some of their personal decisions in their personal lives, but when it came to making decisions for the future, they were virtuous. It's almost like when people take time to think about something other than themselves in the time they're living in now, good decisions happen. And I think that's something that we're lacking, is a sense of for the greater good or something outside of ourselves. I think we are very selfish people, and I think we are so wrapped up in the things that are happening now and how they're affecting us now that I can only see us heading towards the ground because we are not thinking about what can happen later, like in the future. It's all of, how can we stop this issue now? How can I pay less taxes? How can I blah 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 blah? I'm like, but how do we clean up our cities, or how do we blah blah blah? Like, there's just a difference in the mindset, simply from we're creating a government for the people to my local government is not helping me. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Like helping you specifically.
Yeah.
Like your local government isn't doing what you want, and
Therefore,
you're
they're
upset
bad
about
people.
that. Right.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering, like, where that came from, or like, because, it's a pretty common, like, idea in older texts or classic literature that men is inherently evil and that we're like fighting against the natural man to be good people. And so maybe we're just living amongst the natural man and we need to fix that.
Well, doesn't Anatomy of Peace say the opposite, though? That man is naturally good? And that...
It does.
Right. And that we constantly betray ourselves from being good. So I think that's an interesting conflict right there.
Yeah.
Is that
Either way, we're doing bad.
right?
So, this would be an interesting read. In Federalist Paper number 10, Madison brings up this idea of faction, which are number of citizens who are united by common impulse of passion and adverse to the rights of other citizens. That's how he describes a faction. It's a group of people who have the same cause who hate the other cause, who are trying to stop or hurt the other cause. Now, so then he breaks it down like, why does this happen? And I think you're absolutely right. I really believe strongly that people are naturally good. And
I do not.
and I there's probably more support for that side of the argument, and I will give you that.
Either
But
way.
I think I choose to believe that people are naturally good because it makes me a better person. I don't care if it's true or not as much as I care about the consequence of that perspective, which again, I don't.
I guess believing people are naturally good does give them more value.
Well, and it gives me room to give them the benefit of the doubt, which always surprised me that in teaching, I had phases where I liked the classroom to be more disciplined and I liked to know what was going on. And I tend to be kind of short with kids. And I decided, I don't remember what it was, reading Anatomy of Peace or something. I decided, let's just give them some space. And I was blown away when I waited before disciplining somebody, how often they were doing something kind for somebody else. Like somebody's playing with their zipper and I cannot handle it for another second. And then they're like, I wait. I'm like, no, I can hold it in. And they're getting a pencil out for their buddy. Like, and how many times did I stop that because I wanted to get my way? Because I was so focused and not willing to just wait people's intentions out and find out. Let them be innocent before guilty. And we tend to, I mean, we have our weaknesses. But so that's exactly what Madison is saying will happen. So we will gather in groups of people naturally, mostly because of geography. But for any cause at all, we'll just start gathering with people who have common interests. And then when I'm around people, which again is very, very good to be around people with common interests because I understand myself better. I can see different perspectives. I can test whether my interests are good or not. And we're united and we're happy. And I want to be with people who are similar to me. Then the next step comes in where I want to protect my interest. And now I have to stop your interest in order to protect my interest. Right. So it kind of escalates in this group mentality. He breaks down faction, how they're created, and then what to do about them. And what he argues is that a republic is to check factions. Get in your groups, know your principles and fight for them, and know that your interests, like we talked about last time, somebody's interest in Wyoming will be very, very different than in New York, and that is appropriate. Please know what you need and know that someone else needs something different, and that's okay. And then put in something, there's got to be a level in between you two so you can talk about it. And that's what a republic is I get a representative who isn't only going to get what they want, but they're there to hear the other side and defend their side. That's their job. And when I have that level in between us, the faction can go away, the violence can go away without taking away the interest, what we've gathered to do. So one core that we're fallible, that we need groups of people, that we need to work hard, is that we have to be willing to discuss. And that is really difficult. I have to be able to say, why do I believe what I believe? Listen to what other people believe, and then figure out what's best for the next generation. And that usually covers the ground that needs to be covered. It won't be perfect still, but it will cover the ground. So knowing how to discuss, again, with your neighbor, with your school board, with your city, and then with your state is super, super important for the citizen to be involved in.
Well, and kind of circling back to what you said at the beginning where you have to wait people out. That's exactly how our government was built. And we said that a lot. You need to not be focused on the now and not be frustrated on the zipper opening up. Mm-hmm. You need to wait like however long it's going to take for the good to actually come out.
Okay. Yes, I agree. But also, how do we, because we do have to, give things some time to work themselves out. And I know we're not good at that. But how can we tell if something is going to work out or if it's just going to be bad and we need to stop it right away? Like, I don't understand how we're supposed to make that distinction between a good action that just needs time to fatten up or something that is just going to become a monster.
I think so much of it just goes back to trusting that people are good and that people want good things and giving them time, like the zipper or, you know, you're building a fence with your neighbor and you both want your yards to look great, right? And it might just take some time for you both to mull over the finances and what you want your yard to look like to come to a consensus. But sometimes you just have to give it that time and trust that people are good and they're going to make good decisions and people are going to take care of things, right? Miss Cox didn't need to give a pencil to every kid in the class because the kid was opening his jacket to get a pencil for the kid next to him. She didn't need to jump in and fix the situation and make all the kids hang up their jackets so nobody would be playing with their zipper in class and give every kid the same pencil so that they'd all be perfectly prepared for class because we take care of each other and we do that really naturally. So I think just, going back and trusting that that's going to happen. And there are very few things that go so wrong that we need to stop them. And the things that are going so wrong that we would need to stop them would be those things in the Bill of Rights, right? If people are losing their rights that are protected by the first 10 amendments and the rest of them, but specifically those, then that is a point where we have to step in and say, okay, we need a representative to take care of this. We need something to happen to fix this right away.
So I guess it comes back down to knowing your documents. And that kind of leads into a question. Do you think that our youth, particularly our high school age or, middle school, in their schools are being taught American history properly or well enough?
Do you think they are?
Well, I think that obviously schools range from where they're located. Schools in, lower income areas are maybe not as funded. And so some parts of their education system are not as built up, which doesn't necessarily equal bad education. And I think there's a lot to do with the individual. I think people no longer want to be engaged in schooling, maybe because of the way it's set up a little bit, but I do think that people need to actually engage in the system. It was interesting. When I was researching for my paper, I found some statistics and just people don't know, I feel like, the Constitution as well as they should. We were talking about this before we even started recording, but the Annenberg Public Policy Center, which is run by the University of Philadelphia, they do a civics survey every year where they, put out a survey to 1,000 people, which is a lot of people for a survey, especially for but it's a lot. And only 51% of them could name all three branches of government. That just seems a little interesting to me because I'm like, is that a flaw of the system or is that a flaw of the culture that we've kind of cultivated as Americans, that high school is something you just have to get through and then you can live your life, but some of these things are important. 100% of Americans that can vote should know all branches of government. I just think that should be a given. If you're going to have the right to vote. Now this, obviously, everyone has the right to vote once they're of age, but I feel like it's kind of embarrassing that you're going to go out and you're going to vote for your representatives and not understand how your government is set up. That's just kind of stupid. Do better.
So much trust to place in the population.
Yeah.
Something interesting is a while ago, I don't remember how long, I think it was at one of the elections, but Arnesen asked me, she's like, who do you think you would vote for? And I was like, I don't know, I don't really care. Because that's not a decision I have to make. I won't have to make it. I'll have to make it at the next election, I guess. But at that time, it was just not something I cared about. And my parents never talked about it. And it was just not something that was interesting. It seemed so boring. And my extent of the Constitution, learning all that, has come from these past 2-3 weeks of me preparing for this podcast. I've heard the basics, the Civil War when that happened, but I've never really dove into stuff like that until just
You've
now.
heard of the Civil War.
Right. Yeah, that's how I learned
Captain
it.
America, I'm pretty sure that was the Revolutionary War. Just kidding.
Daniel, I think you bring up a really important point, though.
That's so funny.
Because I think it goes back down to what we're talking about vertical government. I'm see if I can put 3 thoughts together. I had someone tell me last presidential election that they hadn't voted for probably 4 years. Guys, there is an opportunity to vote way more often than every 4 years. And this person told me that they were going to vote for president because that was the important one. And that is a really common belief. And if we want to have great government, we have to vote in all the elections. We need to know what's going on locally. And if we want better education, that's where it starts as well, right? Really locally in our classrooms and in our schools, and even more importantly, in our families and ourselves. We're talking about that vertical government. If I want to be a good citizen and have a body of great citizens in the United States, then I have to be a good citizen. And then that affects the people around me, right? I ask someone a question. I talk to my friend at lunch. I talk about it at the dinner table with my parents. When I'm a parent, I talk about it and my kids hear about it. My parents talked about politics and government a lot when I was growing up, and I have very vivid dreams before I was 8 about elections that I still can remember everything. If we want to change something, we have to start at that really low level, which starts with ourselves and then branches out to the people around us.
Right. And that goes back to like people getting frustrated about them not living the life they want. And they expect the government to do something about it. It's like, go fix your life. Go do it yourself.
Fix
You have the
yourself.
power to do that. And that's just where people are not realizing they expect. I feel like at that point, I expected everything to be handed to me on a little silver platter. And like my parents had a job and it was fine, but I have to do something about it. And I have to be voting and I have to put my personal life into it so that I can have a future with my kids and that my kids can have a future and to keep it going and stuff like that. So
I think that's an interesting perspective that we fall into, that I'm going to pass the test in high school. I'm going to know the Civil War happened. And I'm going to memorize a few things that I'm told to memorize. And then I'm going to expect political life to be clear and for me to know exactly where to be involved. And it's always going to be a big deal. It's going to be the presidential, whatever, or it's going to be something that matters. And that is a really big fallacy. Like none of that is true. So the first problem is we memorize things to pass the test and then we move on. And if we don't know how to apply that information, it doesn't help me to memorize names and dates of things if I don't know why they happened and what those things mean. So I would argue even not knowing like the 3 branches of government, it isn't as important to know the words in the Constitution as it is to know what they do. I mean, I agree with you. If you're going to vote, know what you're voting for.
Right.
But it doesn't matter if I can list the word legislative if I know I vote for a person who writes laws. That is extremely important. So to be able to translate what I've memorized for a test into a political life that I now live. But then the other piece we're missing is that transition from high school where maybe I am understanding or I'm reading some documents, but then I'm on my own and I've got to go, like, where is politics now? Like, where do I find politics? And if you think presidential election is the only election that's important, then I cannot find it. There's nothing I can do to find the presidential election except show up one day and punch a name. So like I got to join a school board, or I've got to go to a city council meeting, or I've got to find who's running for mayor next, because those elections happen all the time and they're different in every city. Every city wrote their own set of rules and says the mayor serves for a year or 4 years, or that can vary in huge degrees. And I got to go find out what my city rules are, my city positive law. And then I got to go find those people and I got to find out when they're meeting next. That's what politics looks like when I'm actually living it. And I have to start with my city and then whatever group I'm a part of, HOA, a school. Some businesses have their own groups that meet or boards, or if I want to support a business, I try to get on a board. I can even sit in on almost any board meeting. So if you want to find out about something, you can attend and then find out how to get on the agenda and when is it your turn to speak. We're missing that action piece because I look to DC for my government and I can't find it. But it's everywhere around me. And the more I get involved in that first step, just that one board meeting, then suddenly I start to understand the bigger part in the county and the state government. And then I start to recognize what's going on in DC without actually having to go look for it. It's coming into my world and into my sphere, but I have to take those first actions.
right.
And what's nice about that is not everybody cares about politics, which I don't really understand because I'm kind of a fiery person, but I understand that not everybody cares. And that's what's nice about having like a localized government is you don't have to care about everything. You just have to, maybe like every 2 years, maybe I'll elect this representative or something. Like you don't have to put forth so much effort as like, yes, you need to put forth effort because if you're going to live in a society, you better do your part, right? You don't need to be passionate about it. You don't need to spend your waking hours being like, who am I going to vote for? Oh, the drama. You just need to just engage simply like in your local governments. Just be like, okay, it's time for me to vote. It's your right, but it's also your responsibility.
Right. Well, and if you know what you want, if you know the principles and the morals that you want to be fighting for,
It should be pretty easy.
It's easy.
Yeah.
And then you find, too, once you get involved in those very basic levels, that the people are good. That even people with varying ideas, you all want good and you can work it out together.
And I feel like you should be trying to see people's humanity.
Totally.
Because I don't know. I don't like the way that all politicians are portrayed. Obviously, not all of them are good people. There's like a lot of not good people, right? But they are still humans. And I think we can't forget that, because I think that is a huge flaw.
Yeah.
It creates not a sticky situation for them, but for you, because you're refusing to see the humaneness of somebody. And so you're stuck with, oh, like I said last episode, which evil being am I going to elect? Well, you're going to elect a human being, first off. So think about that maybe instead of them as an object.
One principle I think is really important that our founders protected really well, which is ironic, is that humans are fallible. So we can make mistakes, right? And we do all the time. And usually government is set up and we do all we can to correct a mistake or to prevent a mistake. And that's really a good mentality to have. But it's very important that we remember we will make mistakes. So like what you asked before, how do I tell what the consequences will be generations down the road? Or how do I tell when something needs to be acted upon right now? And I don't. And I get to pick. I get to say, you know what, I'm going to stand on this one and I'm going to find out whether I was right or not. But I have to always keep the principle that I could be wrong. So one thing Solzhenitsyn describes while he's in the Russian gulag.
Give me some background. This guy sounds interesting.
So Alexander Solzhenitsyn was arrested in Russia for political crimes. He doesn't know what he was arrested for. He just was picked up one day. And he is taken to the gulag, which is concentration camps, prison camps in Siberia, the winter of Russia. And he lives in the concentration camps for 25 years. And then he escapes and gets to America and writes a book about the gulag. And it's very intense. It's a very, very good read. Incredibly important. It's called The Gulag Archipelago. Very intense. He does not hide what goes on in a concentration camp. And this is not during war. This is just Russia controlling Russia. So, and that's exactly what he's saying. So he's dealing with the Russian government, literally torturing him, oppressing him. And he just describes the guards. The guards would come in one day and make a huge mistake and kill a bunch of people. And this is broken and the building fell over and all these problems happen. And then the guy in charge, the guy above them, comes in the next day and says, here's what we did. It was on purpose. This building was supposed to topple in just that way. And this is like, everything's fine. And then the chaos continues and nobody knows what's going on, because the core of the guards at the prison was that they could not make a mistake. They had forgotten that they were humans. They literally didn't know they could make a mistake. And when a government can't make a mistake, then it's total chaos all the time.
Mistakes continue to happen.
Mistakes have to continue. You cannot learn from your mistakes. You cannot learn from any of your actions because they were always right. And so that principle is way more important than we think. When I make a mistake and I know I can make a mistake, then the next action gets to be better. And when you make a mistake and I know you're going to make mistakes, it's not the end of the world. I don't have to run away from you. I don't have to kick you out of office. I don't have to hate everything about you and your party or your group. I get to say, is that person going to learn from that action? And if they are, then we're good, because I knew people were going to make mistakes. And we have to hold our principles. I can call people out. We have discipline, but in such a way that we're here to learn from our mistakes, not avoid or ignore mistakes.
Yeah. And I'm reading 1984 right now. I'm like
there
halfway through. Yeah. But without like spoiling anything, they hide everything they do, like all their mistakes. Winston, he's the main character. His job within I don't even know what it's called.
Ministry of Truth?
Yeah, something like that. Basically, what he does is he goes back and he changes documents, like paper documents, because it's set in like the 1960s?
1984.
1984. Oh.
But in a future, it's
right.
written
yes.
It's written in the 40s. 50s, 49,
yes.
I think.
So it's in 1984 and written from the perspective of 1940 something. So basically everything is paper documented. Every day he goes to work and he receives something like, you need to go back, you need to find this document from the Times, and you need to change it. You need to write it, you need to change it, because basically, in one of the things, they have a chocolate ration, because they're at war with Eurasia or something like that. The chocolate ration gets cut down 20%. And they had promised earlier that the chocolate ration would not be cut. And so Winston's job was to go back in the paper and to write that it would be cut. And the people have just lived like this. They just accept everything. And so it's just this cycle of like literally changing history and like changing the past. And so nothing's like really being accomplished. It just stays the same. Mistakes continue to happen. Like, and that's how they are stuck where they are and with their government, is because nobody can like and go, hey, they lied about this, because they can pull out the document and be like, nope, we did not. It's important to, like Ms. Cox said, it's important to have these mistakes, you know, to function and base whatever. I don't even know what I'm talking about. It doesn't.
Well, I see that a lot in my little sister. I mean, she's like 2, and whenever she complains about something and gets something, she complains again. And like it just keeps happening. Whereas if she complains about something and then we don't give it to her, she learns that she can't complain to get it. She has to actually like work for it, right?
We're all just little children.
Yeah.
Yes, and we're building habits right now. So the way I approach things, or who I'm complaining to, is building up habits. So the more I complain about anything and the less I do about it, the more I'm building that habit of I should complain and sit back and wait.
Ooh, I hate that. I hate this new thing about complaining on social media, getting everybody around you fired up about something, and then
not doing anything about it. Like, people are just angry to be
also,
angry.
do you
at
know
that
what
point.
you're talking about? Do you know what needs to be done?
Right.
Then don't talk about it.
Right.
I think that's such a good point too. That
Or don't like preach about it. Like discuss it. But anyway, sorry, Miss Arnesen.
No, you're good.
You can talk about things.
Let me
just
put
do
together
it right.
my thoughts while you do it. What Jen was saying about his 2-year-old sister, if we want to be great citizens of the United States, then it does start really young, right? It starts in the habits that we create when we are 2 and when we're 5 and when we're 14. And this mindset of saying, I'm not 18, I can't vote, therefore I'm not involved in my government, is absolutely not true. You can do so much before you're 18 as a citizen of the United States. You can go talk to your city councilman. You can talk to your neighbors. You can work for a cause. You can work on a campaign that you can't vote for. You can go talk in a committee meeting at the state congressional sessions. You can do so many things. And so if we want to become really great citizens, that's what we have to start looking at is, what am I doing now? And am I creating habits that I'm going to like when I'm 40 and maybe have a few more assets to be invested into the government? But it's start now. Find something to be involved in now on a principal basis.
And it can really be anything, not even a political entity, like an orchestra, for example, or like a team of any kind, because figuring out how to work with people, figuring out how to disagree with people, figuring out how to save money, figuring out what a long-term investment means, those are all habits that you have to be a good citizen. That is a good citizen. Just like a quality person creates a quality environment in every aspect.
Well, that's what you can do now, is you can create good habits. It's a good thing to do now, or like, it's always good to create good habits, but I think before you can even vote, it's good to, you know, start making those habits, because habits are really hard to start, really hard to start later. I'm only 17, but I'm already struggling with doing everything. Read your documents, start looking into things, or, you know, participate, like Ms. Cox said, you know, learn how to work with other people. Just don't be lazy. Do something, engage. That's the biggest takeaway. Engage in something. Something good and legal, please.
Unless you win.
Unless you win, right? If you're gonna commit treason, win.
Win.
But even better, stand on principles.
Right. Your principles better be worth committing treason for. So that's my challenge for you guys for the next 2 weeks and the rest of your lives. Engage in something good and wholesome.
The big takeaway for today would be know your founding documents and understand what's happening in your government. And then find a way to get involved on a local level and make sure that you are striving for virtue, and it's okay to make mistakes.
Follow us on our Instagram at The Paradigm Pod. And if you want to talk to us about ideas or anything you want us to talk about here on the podcast, you can email us at podcast@paradigmhigh.org.
Also, make sure if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, like it, give us 5 stars and leave a review. That helps us boost up in the algorithm.
Sometimes it's hard to know exactly what to do and what to do next and how to get involved. So don't make it too big. Don't get overwhelmed. Just do the next good thing. Join the great conversation of ideas.